Hey there, and welcome back to the Complicated Kids podcast. I'm your host, Gabrielle Nicolay. I am a toddler whisperer, a speech therapist, and a parent coach. And today I have Emily King with me on the podcast. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome, welcome. I'm going to let you tell the folks who you are and what you do. Your job title, loosely defined, is a child psychologist, but I know that you have some special expertise, and then we're going to dive into our topic. Um, yeah, so take it away. Introduce
Yeah,
yourself, please.
thank you. So I started my career as a school psychologist. So my degree is actually in school psychology, where I worked in public schools in Houston, Texas actually. So I got a lot of urban, suburban, rural mix of experience, because that's what you get when you work in Texas. And I loved my work there. I got to do a lot of mental health in the schools, lots of complex behaviors. And home is North Carolina. So by the time we decided to move back home and settle in, I realized that I just wanted a little bit more flexibility than just working in schools. So I entered private practice about 15 years ago when we moved back home. And I sense of just over an evolution of time, specialize more and more in neurodivergent kids and teens, autistic kids and students, kids with ADHD, teens with twice exceptionalities, all the things that make asynchronous brains, complex and beautiful. And I just love to get in there and figure out how we can lean into strengths and add supports. So I do a lot of parent consultation, teacher consultation, helping the adults really around kids thrive. And one of the things that I know we'll probably talk a little bit about today is there are limits to what we can do in therapy with kids. And that's true probably of most modalities. There's always limits to any modality, but especially with neurodivergent kids, this kind of started over COVID when we had these restrictions and couldn't be in person. I realized, oh my gosh, I can teach parents so much to help their kids at home. And then, coming to realize so many autistic kids I work with can know all the things in my session. They can tell me everything about everything, and then they can't generalize it. So and that's just a part of their literal thinking and one of the great parts of memories that they have, and then the harder part. So I'm always trying to just keep evolving and thinking, how best can we help kids thrive? And that's just led me more to what I do now, which is professional development for teachers, as well as online parent workshops, and talking about with anyone who wants to talk to me about how we can help neurodivergent kids learn the best.
I love that you are talking to teachers about this because they are at the front line
Yeah.
and they are often, when you're a parent and you are confronted with your child, it lights a fire to understand what's happening and to like figure it out and get the help and all of that. When you're a teacher, you have 25 students potentially who are neurodivergent in front of you, and they all have different needs, and you haven't had any training for that. And
Right.
so, what I see you doing is providing tremendous value in that capacity to people who are like, "What do I do? These kids are in my class, and I need tools." So,
Right.
I just love that you're like doing that piece of it as well. And they're not therapists, but there are things that they can do.
Right.
And so I think before we hit record, we kind of sketched out a couple of different themes for this conversation. One of them was, what can non-therapists do in support of neurodivergent kids? But I think where I want to start with this is one of the things that we can do is modify the rules of success.
Yeah.
So, do you want to talk about how you think about that a little bit, about
Yeah,
what success
absolutely.
is, what it's not, like
Mhm.
how, just tell me what all the things you
Yeah, so
think
I
about.
would just challenge everyone listening to, like, when you hear the term like academic success or social success, what does that mean to you? It probably means something related to how your parents expected you to rise to some expectation. And I've come to this flexible definition of success over years and years of working with such asynchronous learners, right? Where one, they may be, really successful in math and have dyslexia, or they may be reading 3 grade levels above and not be able to remember to put their shoes on in the morning, like all of these things that are just really asynchronous skills, and things that don't align with a standardized curriculum or a standardized time frame of learning. So when we think about success socially, so one side is kind of academic, the other is social. Parents often get really worried. Well, my kid's alone on the playground, or they're digging in the dirt, or they're sitting alone. I can't tell you how many autistic children and teens have said, I love digging in the dirt. It is like my recovery time at recess. They are so happy about it. They are totally, what I say is, they're socially satisfied. So they're not thinking about our version of success. They don't even know about our version of success. That's some sort of cultural assumption we've made, right? So I just challenge everyone to think about, how are you defining success? Because wherever you've got that bar in your mind and wherever your kids' skills are, the distance between those two things is your level of anxiety about your child's success, right?
I love that. Okay, pause. Because there are people listening who are like, but Emily, they have to live in the real world someday, even if it's not now. And again, I love that image of like where you're at and where your kid is at, not that your level of anxiety. This is very, very clear. But, right, but still, I call them the yeah buts. So what do you say when people bring you the yeah buts?
Yeah, they do have to live in the world, which is why we help our kids. We help shift mindsets and really flex mindsets. And we advocate for flexibility with timing about things. We advocate for whatever we're still gonna, this is a long journey, y'all. We are gonna be advocating for support with, community colleges and colleges, trade schools and colleges after, whatever we need to support our kid to get job skills. And then there's some really cool, exciting programs that are thinking ahead and training managers about neurodiversity and helping them understand, like, some of these kids have incredible, I say kids, they're probably like 25, have incredible skills that we're missing out on just because this child doesn't interview like other people, right? So we really need to think outside the box on big picture culturally. What is our view of success? Because it's all interconnected. And I'll take a step back and also add that our kids are really on their own time frame. And yes, we want to keep moving them forward. But I've worked in this area long enough to know that you can't rush development. We all know that, right? We know that when a child is learning to walk, it's obvious. You can't make a child walk. You can't make a child talk. Yes, we can do all these things to support development. But as therapists working with developmental goals with kids, sometimes you get into patterns where you're working on it and you just kind of hit a wall because you just need maturity and brain development to catch up.
I call
And
it,
I've been in these situations.
we need to let it marinate.
You need to let it marinate. And I've been in these situations where I'll say to parents, in my clinical opinion, we are not doing anything wrong. This is just hard right now because of how old this child is chronologically and where their skills are. Because at some point, I say this to kids all the time, at some point, somebody decided we were going to have kindergarten and 12 grades. And that, like, maybe we decide at 18, you were quote unquote done with school. Really, like, I need to do some research and figure out where it all came from. But our kids, as we know, I mean, once all the research started coming out about like your executive functioning doesn't fully develop till you're 25, I know all the developmental people are like, well, hold on a minute. Like, and you have ADHD and you're autistic. Like, of course, we're going to need to be flexible on timelines. So I'm not saying don't prepare your child for the future. I'm saying we have to be flexible with timelines of success, because if we push and push and push, we're going to have stressed out kids and stressed out families that can't grow. We can't grow when we're stressed.
Yeah. And you're going to put people into burnout, which,
right. And we put people into burnout. Kids can be in burnout. Teachers can be in burnout. parents can be in burnout, all because it's, cliche, but it's fitting the square peg into the round hole. Let's just let kids be ready for that next step. We have to be proactive, and we have to figure out when is a skill emerging. And that does take consulting, usually with a professional, or maybe even just your teacher, about, have we ever seen this kid do this skill?
Yeah.
If we've never seen it, it might not be developmentally kind of on deck, is what I say. But if sometimes it's happening like when they're really rested, or it's always happening in this class with this teacher they love, it's emerging, it's coming. So how can we expand that? And that's that flexible idea of success I try to help everyone shift their mindset on, because when we are less stressed and more chill, as our kids say, we can all be more open to progress.
And this is something I coach parents a lot about, because when you are so stuck in your story and it's not good and it's not good, and what about this and what about that, and toilet training is something that comes up a lot in my practice for whatever reason, and kids are not potty training, and they're not potty training, and they're 4 and they're 5 and they're 6 and they're 7. And I'm saying, we got to wait. Developmentally, I love your developmentally, it's not on deck yet. They're not showing readiness. They're resisting. And anytime we've got a kid who's pushing back, I was with a child last night. I asked him a question. He ran away. What does that tell me? That tells me his nervous system is not able to take up what I'm laying down. And what that means to me as a clinician, and you and I have lots of practice doing this, and this is something that we teach parents to do and teachers, it means I got to change my behavior, right? My nervous system, my brain is fully cooked and usually well regulated. So it's my job as the adult to match the kids. It's not their job to match me, but that is a really hard lesson for lots of people. People who, adults who have had their own childhood trauma, who are stressed at work for their own reasons, who are dealing with complex needs of their children. Like, do you want to speak a little bit about?
Yeah, I think that we are the first generation of adults to change something about ourselves to help children be less stressed. If you think about our parenting experiences, anything of how we were parented, anything related to traditional discipline of do it because I say so, this is the expectation, and I expect you just to figure it out, suck it up and do something, all of that stuff. Those things only work if you have the skills to do it, right? And if you don't have the skills, it's like asking a kid with a broken leg to run a race, right? But obviously, if we have not experienced someone doing that for us, that's why it's so hard for all the grown children, all the parents in this moment, to shift this in their mind, because no one's modeled it for us. So anytime there's a big generational shift, it takes a lot of practice, and there's going to be pushback from people who say, well, I turned out okay. My parent just expected things of me, and I figured it out. And that may be true in some cases, but I often will follow up with the question of, tell me about your relationship with your parent now. And some adult children who are parenting young kids now are scared of their parents, have a fear-based relationship, have an avoidant relationship with their parents. And not all, but it makes sense, right? Because traditional discipline can be very rooted in fear, which on paper, on the surface, does work in terms of compliance. Quote unquote work. Y'all can't see us work. But it doesn't lead to intrinsically motivating a child to work harder or want to do something. And yes, we do have to learn to do things that we don't love, that are not our favorite. But there are ways to do that in a way that's not fear-based.
Yeah. I say this often to coaching clients. When you are in conflict with your child, there's 3 of you in that interaction. there's your adult self, your child self, and then your actual child.
Yes.
And your child self is screaming at you that nobody ever did this for me. How come your actual child, how come they get this? How come you have to do this for them? It is a very fraught dynamic. And so part of, a lot of what I think, what I hear you saying too, is this shift comes with like, we got to practice some new skills here as adults who are in relationships with children, about sort of, and whatever people talk about healing their wounds, and that's all fine and good, and it should be done. But it is a little bit of that, like, right?
Yeah, and I think
doing our own work.
Yeah, and this is relevant for all parenting. What I see time and again is that we have to do this with neurodivergent kids. We don't have a choice because our children will be living in stress states and in burnout if we don't flex a little bit and find this balance of what they're capable of and what they're not capable of, because that's a moving target. Sometimes it's a moving target within the day, from yesterday to tomorrow, and it's tricky.
Yeah.
But they simply, because of their sensitive nervous systems, because of the asynchronicity of their skills, they simply cannot just suck it up and do the things because someone said so. Because usually they're not, especially with our autistic children, they're not socially motivated to do that. They're motivated by their interests. So we have to figure that out. And that's a change we have to make if we want our children to make progress. So we have to do this for them. And it's also healthy for neurotypical children as well.
Yes. Oh, I love that point, which is right. All of these strategies, all of these accommodations that, how many times has somebody said this to you? This is old. When I first started in special education, I would have teachers who would say, well, I don't do special education. I'm like, okay, well, first of all, you do. You just don't know that you do. And second of all, ew. Have people ever said that to you?
Yeah, well, it comes up in the context of when I lead my professional development trainings. They're for all staff. They're for all teachers. And in the beginning, I would get some pushback, but isn't this all just stuff for the special ed department? Well, no, because, just a quick little history, of course, everyone listening probably knows this, but before 1975, our children with disabilities were not even allowed in the school building. And then since 1975, we have done better in that we have special education services, right? But it's very much, us and them kind of feel. And all of our teaching programs, our teacher training programs are designed that way too. You're either a special educator or you're a general educator. But then we have inclusion and this push to mainstream. And so many, like you said at the beginning, these general education teachers don't have training handle. So the way I think about it is like dynamic education. It's not like you need general ed or you need special education. We're all just dynamic. Like one day we may be independent and then the next day we may need an intervention. And the kids who are in mainstreaming into general education, I'm not talking about kids who do need higher support needs. There is a reason that some children need, self-contained classrooms with smaller groups and highly specialized trained teachers. That's a different thing. This is more for our kids who are learning on the general curriculum, but need accommodations for sensory and executive functioning and attention spans and all those things that can interfere with learning for a very bright child. So yes, I think of it more dynamic and less gen ed, special ed.
Yeah, I love that. How do you, when you're dealing with teachers, how do you explain this performance inconsistency phenomenon? And so two parts. How do you explain that piece of it? Because that's something, right? Fluctuations throughout the day, fluctuations throughout the week, the year, whatever. But they knew it yesterday, right? That's that whole thing. And then also, flew out of my head. So just do the first one and then I'll come back to it.
You knew it a minute ago, but you didn't know it now. So that is what I often will do. So we have moments, we all have moments like this. We are actually recording this on a Friday afternoon. It's not my best time of day, but I committed to it and I am here. It's probably the time of the week where I'm like starting the descent into the weekend, you know, I could get a little distracted. But what happens to all of us is we all have different ranges of energy, stamina, on a regular day, right? Like we're fresh in the morning, or we do really great after lunch, or some kids have a slump after lunch. Like all these patterns are very individual to all of us. And then you add on top of that that you have a sensory processing disorder, or that you have an anxiety disorder, or you can't pay attention unless you are very interested in the topic. In any other topic, you are thinking about your favorite thing in your head and you have not processed any of the language. So when I talk to teachers about how skills can, there are two things. Skills showing up one day and being gone the next day could be a memory weakness. It could be they have it in their working memory, but it's not getting encoded into their long-term memory. And so they understand it one day and then with that memory weakness, and that's, you know, something that would come out in psychological testing.
Yeah.
However, the ebb and flow of things like ability to get to work, or the ability to attend to a task, or ability to work with a peer without getting irritable, those are all things that are affected by our nervous system, that are affected by how tired we are, how hungry we are, if we have to go to the bathroom, if we're constipated. You know, I have worked with kids who no one can figure out why they're in such an irritable fuss. And then the next day they spike a fever and everyone's like, oh, that's why, you know? So they can't explain that. They may not even have the interoceptive connection to feel it, know it, communicate it, right? So some of this is detective work on our part. But what we have to do is believe that something is off. Even if we don't know what is off, we've got to believe it and understand that it is very possible for a child to be successful one day and not successful the next day. So that's why I always say to teachers I work with, I'm not concerned unless something's a pattern. We do have flukes, but if this child is always struggling with a certain teacher or a certain time of day or a certain subject or a certain peer, this is a pattern and we need to start tweaking the environment, tweaking the topic, tweaking the presentation of the work, whatever it is, until we can land on what increases engagement so we can sustain better attention, and what decreases anxiety so that this child's executive functioning can work better. Because as we know, when we're more anxious, we can't think.
Yeah. It is tweaking that environment it requires us to believe the child.
Yes.
And that, I think, is one of those shifts that you're talking about, we were talking about earlier in terms of like parenting, because it's like, I say, you do, that's how this works. I'm a grown up, you're a kid. But if we are to believe children, have you heard the term childism? It's a form of, it's like ableism, which I'd love to talk to you about. It like sexism, it's another ism. And it's predicated on this idea that children are inherently less valuable because they are children. And while children have fewer skills and children are still developing and they are not cooked, their brains are not finished, they make lots of mistakes, they're sloppy, they're messy, they're all the things. But they are not a subclass of human.
Right.
And so
historically, they've been treated that way.
Yeah. And guess what? They don't vote, they don't make money. So in the, you know, whatever kind of worldview we're living in here, they don't matter. And I think you said this earlier, which is like when children are neurodivergent and they can't figure it out and just go along to get along, which is what most people do, right? And then, you know, you're 16 years old and you're like, this feels awful. And you start taking drugs or whatever it is that you do, right? Drive fast cars around very curvy roads, engage in all kinds of self-sabotage because your life feels awful. But these guys, the ones that you and I work with and their families, they're starting from a place of really not being able to even do that.
Right.
Right. And so anyway, this whole childism idea, but I want to talk to you about ableism. That's, I think, a better sort of lens or container to play with. How do you define this for people? And like, what do you want people to understand about ableism?
Yeah, what I want people to know in the context of neurodiversity and ableism is that because of the history of how education was created, traditional education, and these are all good things, 100 years ago, kids weren't being educated, kids couldn't read.
Yeah.
And that was a problem, right? And so it's good that we have education. I just think we are in a crux of another evolution of it, of like, we need to go one more step further. And when I think about the standardization of education, I understand as a former school employee, we have to start somewhere. There are a lot of children. We have to group them in some way. We have to put them in buildings, in groups with teachers who specialize in roughly that grade or that age. Like, I understand all of these things. And there are going to be children who cannot achieve the same thing based on their chronological age or the grade that they're in. And I'm not just talking about academics, I'm talking about social, I'm talking about skills that gifted kids have that are way above grade level, and then they're losing their love of learning because they're not engaged enough. It's complex. And so, this dynamic idea of, is there a way to flex some of these, just the way we present things, that would be, so much better for increasing engagement. And the way that we've the standardization of education, or the standardization of you know requirements for a job interview, for instance. Job interviews are incredibly neurotypical and ableist. You have to be able to wear fancy clothes. You have to be able to talk to a stranger. You have to talk about yourself, which is strange. And so when you really think about what we do in a job interview, it's very unusual. And so, like, for instance, why can't we allow kids to be able to show work samples or to demonstrate something they're really great at, instead of sitting in a room and talking about what they can do? So, like, things like this, when I think of ableism, I just think of neurotypical expectations that are out of reach, and so out of reach that they begin to discriminate against the skills or the lack of skills that kids and teens may have, that could give them access to growth and progress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It is, this topic is deep, it is broad, and I think it's really meaningful. And so we're going to put a pin in it here, unfortunately, but I just want to thank you so much for coming, and for number one, for the work you're doing, number two, for coming here to talk about it with us. And if people want to learn more about you, Emily King, where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can go to learnwithdremily.com for professional development. Just add a /schools to that, learnwithdremily.com/schools. And then my parent workshops are over on Substack with my blog. So that's just learnwithdremily.substack.com. There are about 9,000 of us there. So it's a strong community of all the blogs are free. And then there's a subscription for workshops over there to join us once a month. They're live workshops, and then they're all recorded if you can't come live. And so that work just continues, and we will just continue having conversations like this so that everyone can keep shifting that mindset and thinking about how we can change to make these kids' lives better, and just have them be able to access all the things we know they're capable of.
Yeah, and it's work, but it's good work.
Yeah.
Because when I see that kiddo relax into themselves,
Mm-hmm.
thank their brain for whatever that they just learned, or celebrate their own whatever.
Yeah.
It is, I mean, for me, that's the best.
The best.
And then when you empower a parent to do the same, right? And then people feel better. People feel better.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you want to feel terrible all the time? Let's not do that to ourselves.
Mm-mm.
There are better ways.
Right.
So thank you for
sure.
showing us. It was so nice to have you. Thank you.
Yes, thanks for having me.